Let's start, again, placing us all in the Enneagram story by just quickly going through all 9 types and just getting a sense of how do all these 9 types live into relationships. And I told you last week I'm getting in trouble for starting with 1s and going all the way to the end and ending with 9s. Who are my 9s? Who are already wondering if you're important and your presence matters, and you do. So I'm going to start with 9s tonight. So 9s, relationships are very important to 9s. But 9s don't know themselves through the relationships that they're a part of. So here's what I mean by that. Relationships are important. 9s are good at relationships. They like relationships. But they have a little bit more of kind of an independent, solid sense of self in that they aren't defined by their relationships. So they don't necessarily think of themselves as Mark's wife and Tom's father and these kind of ways in which other numbers know themselves through relationships. 9s are peacemakers, which means that their focus in relationship is avoiding conflict. Which means that in the context of relationships, 9s do a lot of avoidance. And some of the spiritual work for 9s in relationships is remembering that the absence of conflict does not mean the presence of peace. Has anybody found that out before? I have. 9s merge in relationships because they would rather go along and get along than cause disruption. So merging for 9s is a big thing, right? It's kind of where 9s are able to adapt really easily and sort of merge into what you want to do and how you want to be, where you want to go eat. And they're able to do that pretty quickly because merging for them is a way of not causing disruption, not asserting themselves too strongly, and not risking conflict. 9s don't need to reach out a lot in relationships, and they don't need to intervene, but they're people who can reconnect even after years and years. So 9s usually have old relationships. They still probably have some relationships from 10 or 20 years ago, but they're not always needing to kind of reach out and touch all those relationships, but they're ready to jump back in at a moment's notice. There's kind of a deep sense of history that they carry, and that's part of, we talked about last week, 9s having an orientation to time of the past. 8s, who are my 8s? 8s are protectors of people and pursuers of justice. And this impacts their relationships, right? They'll do it on your behalf and on their own behalf too. So they are protectors of people. They protect themselves. They protect you too. They protect their tribe. They're interested in things being just and fair. And they will pursue justice and fairness on behalf of people that are in their tribe and that they're in relationship with. 8s don't trust easily, right? That's kind of a core thing about 8s. And 8s also don't have to be in relationship with you. Some of us, I'm a 2, I kind of need to be in relationship with you. I need us to be friends. 8s don't have to be friends with you. They want to, they're good people. They want to be friendly. They want to be good to you. But it's okay if you aren't their friend or if they're not their friend. And they don't always understand why you need to be friends with them if they don't need to be friends with you. They've got good boundaries. They're independent people. They don't trust too easily. But when they do let people into the tribe and the trust circle, it's a deep, important thing. They're going to be supremely loyal. They're going to protect that relationship. Because 8s protect themselves from being too vulnerable, they sometimes ghost from relationships that are hard or that become too emotional. So sometimes when a relationship is inviting the 8 to kind of go in real deep and real far in a way that invites emotion to kind of be expressed, 8s, sometimes you find them kind of withdrawing from that. The last thing I'll say about 8s in relationship is if it's going to feel intimate to an 8, it better be intense. And that applies to everything. If something is going to feel really good and really intimate, like the relationship is really strong and you've had a real good connection between two people, they're going to need it to feel intense, or else it doesn't necessarily feel intimate. So people in relationships with 8s just need to know if it didn't feel intense in some way, that it probably didn't feel like it was intimate. 7s, who are my 7s? We got a lot of 7s. 7s are kind of loners at the core. But they're good in relationships and they're fun to be around and people want them around. But at the core, 7s, remember, they're holding that wound that says, I better not depend on anybody for anything. So there's a little bit of kind of a way in which 7s are present with people. They're in the middle of the party, but they're also almost set apart, even by being in the middle of things. 7s are rolling stones. They don't like to be tied down. They don't like routine. They don't like to be predictable. And they may swing between being too much or too little in relationship. Because 7s hate to be trapped in pain. You know, this is the big fear for 7s, is being trapped in pain. And because 7s hate that, they can't stay in relationship with somebody that they can't make happy. This is just a thing for 7s. It's very difficult for 7s to remain in relationship with people that they can't make happy. And 7s in relationship, they typically try to kind of order their life in such a way to where they don't have to depend on other people for things. So again, that's just that kind of independent streak that 7s carry, that carries into their relationships. Who are my 6s? All right, awesome. So 6s are great at relationships. They're steady and they're loyal and they're dependable. And they're unwavering in their relationships. 6s seek to build communities, not just individual relationships. So when 6s relate to others, they're also relating to the whole context and the whole community, not just to one-on-one relationships. So they're interested in being a part of a group and being a part of a family and being part of a church community. 6s seek reassurance in relationships. A lot of what 6s are looking for in relationships is somebody to help support and reassure them that they're on the right path, that they're making the right decisions, that they're doing the right things. 6s ask a lot of questions. And part of that goes back to their wound of realizing that the world is dangerous and maybe they shouldn't trust themselves to make it safely through. So 6s are asking questions of other people. They're checking in. So in relationships, 6s have close, intimate relationships, but people who are in relationship with 6s have to know that 6s are wired for manipulative behavior. And remember, I'm always kind of talking about average space, so don't hear me kind of beating up on you 6s. When 6s are healthy, they're really well boundaried and they're not the subject of manipulative behavior, but they're wired for it because they're wired to not trust their own inner guidance and their own inner instinct. So you've got to know, if you're in relationship with a 6, you've got to give them time and space to answer the question for themselves, not to always jump in and kind of assert yourself as the more knowledgeable, stronger, more competent, more ready for action person. You've got to give 6s time so that 6s can learn to trust their own inner guidance. Who are my 5s? 5s are loyal and steady and faithful in relationships. Sometimes I've had a 5 recently tell me, I make one new friend every year. You know, 5s don't need as many friends as the rest of us. They just don't. They are such a strong interior number that they are okay with a limited set of close, deep relationships. And for some fives, that's one person. For some fives, that's a very small circle. And actually, for every five, it's brave of them to show up it's braver for a five to show up in relationship than it is for any other number. Because it's less intuitive for fives to show up in relationship than it is for any other number. So when fives let another person in, even if it's one person, that's a brave, courageous, non-intuitive thing for them. But when fives do have relationships, they are strong, they are steady, they are loyal. Sometimes because fives feel like relationships draw a lot from them. Because relationships do. You remember how fives are living with that limited set of energy? Where every day they start out with new manna. But it spoils. It doesn't last till the next day. So they've only got this one tank of manna. And every handshake, every phone call, every email, every pop into my office and just shoot the breeze, all the stuff that I do to everybody I work with, it costs a lot. And fives are trying, of course, to get home to their wives or their Cocker Spaniels or whoever's there before this happens. And so because of that, fives realize relationships cost a lot. Which is why sometimes fives self-sabotage themselves and kind of have a push-pull dynamic in relationships because they're costly, they know they need them, they want them, but it costs them a lot. So you got to know, the fives in your life, you got to know that you have more emotional needs in relationship than they have. And so it's going to be easy for you to feel neglected, emotionally neglected by the fives. But it doesn't mean you're being emotionally neglected, but you might feel that way. This is one of the beautiful things about a tool like the Enneagram. It can just kind of give some language for that. I tell this every time I teach about fives. I'm a 2, we're getting to 2s. And one of the people that I work very closely with is a 5. His name is Chad. And Chad is a process guy. He's a 5. He builds systems to make sure that he doesn't have to talk to me every day. And meanwhile, I want to have a meeting. And the 5s hate meetings. They think meetings and committees are the unable asking the unwilling to do the unnecessary, right? And meetings aren't much better. And 5s just know this. And they hate group projects. It's like, tell me what you need, tell me when you need it, and I'll do it, and it'll be done right. So in this relationship with the 5 that I have with Chad, we've been able to use this language to just kind of poke fun at ourselves. It just kind of gives us a moment to just have a de-escalating set of language, say, oh my gosh, I know, I've got that 2 thing, I'm just always trying to be in your face, and we can kind of laugh about it. It just, without this language though, before we introduced Enneagram language into our work environment, there's a little bit of that kind of tension that just builds, right? So that's one of the goals, I hope, in your relationships, in marriage, in friendship, in work, in all the relationships that you have. If you can introduce some of this language, it just can de-escalate stuff. It's a way of poking fun at yourself. It's a way of making sense of why we see and process differently. Okay, 4s. Who are my 4s? Did you raise your hand? No. Okay. Who are my 4s? I don't have any 4s. Okay, well, we're still going to talk about 4s because you all know and love 4s. Who knows and loves a 4? Okay, nice. So 4s desperately want to be in relationship. They want relationship, but it's hard for them to trust relationship. It's hard for them to feel like everything's secure because 4s always feel like something's missing. They always feel like the other shoe's about to drop. So 4s in relationship, you got to know, they do the biggest push-pull. They pull you in, but then they push you away before you can leave them because they just know you're going to leave them because everybody leaves them because they're too much for everybody. But then they pull you back in. So push-pull is a big thing for 4s. You just got to know that that's part of their intuitive way of being. A beautiful thing, though, that 4s have is 4s love vulnerability. So they'll go deep quick. They are ready to sit down with you for the first time meeting you and listen to your life story and tell their life story, and they can get vulnerable quickly. And that's a beautiful gift that 4s have to give in relationship. We say sometimes when we teach the Enneagram, 4s are the only number that can bear witness to pain without needing to fix it. They are truly the most empathetic number. Everybody else is always trying to avoid pain, right? I mean, we say we're not, but we are. So, if your dog dies next week, I'm a 2, I'm probably going to bring a puppy over. But a 4 can just sit with you in it and not need to fix it, not need to say anything. So when you're going through the deepest, darkest holes of life, find a 4. They're great in relationship. Truly, that's a gift they have to give you. And it's a gift you have to give them to allow them to sit in that with you. 4s can't stay in relationship if authenticity isn't at the core. Authenticity is everything for 4s. You can be fully authentic. You can be fully laid bare with all your mess and everything in front of them. They don't have judgment about it. But if you can't give them the space to be fully authentic, they're not interested. 3s. Who are my 3s? I know I got at least one 3. My friend John. 3s are personable, but they're not always personal. So 3s are good at relationships. They are intuitive. They are part of that feeling grouping of numbers with 2s and 4s. But they also kind of manage their own personalness. They manage their own vulnerability. They would kind of rather know more about you than you know about them. But they're good at relationship. They are emotionally intuitive. They're personable. But it's good spiritual work for 3s to become personal. That's the spiritual work for 3s. Sometimes 3s miss cues of softer, tenderer feelings. It sometimes takes them by surprise that they were moving too quickly for other people, or that they kind of didn't notice the softer, tenderer feeling happening around them and they didn't attend to it. Sometimes that takes them by surprise. 3s have lots of circles of relationships. They've got this diverse group. It sometimes looks wild to the rest of us how they can go be with this whole group. They were in this club in high school, and it was the theater club. But then they also played football, and then they also were with these people at church. And then they can manage lots of circles of relationship because they're adaptable, they're flexible. They can be with this crowd and really get into it. And they can be with this crowd and really get into it. And it's not a deceptive thing. It's not they're not the same person kind of thing. It's just they actually can do it. They can actually manage lots of circles of relationship. The invitation for 3s, the spiritual invitation, is for them to go deep with someone or with some group rather than moving from relationship to relationship or group to group. So it's always a spiritual invitation for 3s to just become more vulnerable, to open up a little bit more, and to go deep with whoever they're with. 2s. Who are my 2s? Awesome. I like that. Pride in 2s, Lee. I love it. I'm with you. So 2s pursue relationships more than any other number. They do. They're the relationship number, and they're good at it. We're good at relationships, but the best part of us is the worst part of us. And there's shadow and light in everything. And so 2s, here's the thing. 2s are the centerpieces of their families and their communities and their work and their churches and whatever. But 2s can be the centerpiece in a way that's manipulative and controlling, or in a way that's loving and freeing. And every two has a capacity to do either. Twos often find themselves for some period of time, and again, remember, I'm talking about average space, but for some period of life, twos often find themselves in at least one codependent, enmeshed relationship. Because twos are wired for it. I often say, if God didn't mean for me to be in codependent, enmeshed relationships, why did He give me all the tools necessary? And so there's spiritual work for twos to find their own personal boundaries and their own sense of self, and to be right-sized in the relationship, and to not be too much, and to ask before you give. Like, does this person want my help? That's a good question for twos. Sometimes, believe it or not, they didn't want your help. I know it's crazy. They could, everyone could just have such a better life if they would just let me help them. But sometimes people don't want my help. Twos have to ask that question. Did this person ask for my help? Is there really something kind of deep down I'm really expecting from them if I help? And of course, what twos are expecting is never, money or fame. But am I expecting that if I help them, that they will see me as, just such a wonderful person? I mean, here's the thing. Twos don't really just want to be your friend. They want to be the person who you say, I've got all these good friends, but then there's Hunter. And I'll just tell you, I just don't know anybody else like him. That's what twos are kind of looking for. And twos have to be honest about it and realize that can actually be a big roadblock to healthy relationships, right? Because it can be something where twos can be too much. Twos can insert themselves too much, intervene too much, can be a little bit manipulative and controlling. Twos can have a lot of expectations that are not really right. Anne Lamott says every expectation is a resentment waiting to happen, which we just know is true. Twos are the most emotionally intelligent number on the Enneagram, but they're the least emotionally intelligent number about themselves. Twos know what you're feeling. They know what you need. They know who you are. But if you turn the mirror around and say, well, what do you need though? Who are you? What are you feeling? That's unexplored territory until a two does their work. And twos just have to know that. Ones, who are my ones? Ones are in what we call in Enneagram speak the dependent stance with twos and sixes, which means that ones are relationship people as well, just like twos and sixes. They're good at relationships. They've got a lot of relationships. They're emotionally intuitive. Ones also, similar to twos, kind of usually pick up on and know what you're feeling, what you're sensing, what you're needing. So they're good at relationships, but a tricky thing with ones is they have a tendency to privilege behavior over relationships, which means that it's difficult for ones to want to be in relationship with people whose behavior doesn't match the standard. If your behavior falls below the standard, ones often will feel disappointed in you, feel like you have breached the relationship in some way. And you might be thinking, well, my behavior doesn't have anything to do with you. If you go out and do something crazy, I can't even think of an example, you get a DUI, that's nobody needs to go get a DUI. If you go get a DUI, a one that you're friends with will feel like you've breached their relationship. Do you know what I mean? And you might think, well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I need to do something different. I need to make better choices. But that didn't have anything to do with you or with our relationship. But to a one, it did, because your behavior fell below the line. And ones have to pay attention to that because there's some good in that, but there's some bad in that too. There's some way in which sometimes the people who are living with and loving ones recognize that their love sometimes feels conditional on their behavior meeting the standard. And ones just have to be aware of that, because ones can sometimes be hard on the people that they love. Ones are loyal and dependable. They're not usually the ones who leave relationships. Ones don't leave marriages very easily because, they're in it. They said they'd be in it. They made a vow. That's a beautiful, ones are loyal. They're dependable. When ones move away from dualistic thinking, when they move away from either or black and white thinking, they can be the best friends and the best partners that a person can have. Okay. So here's what I want to do so that's my little, blow through the numbers, kind of get us all back in Enneagram language, give us a little bit of insight about how each number thinks about and lives in and processes relationship. Are you with me? You doing good? Okay. I know this is kind of a lot of info tonight, but I do want to be thinking of your questions. We're going to have some Q&A time about 7:15, 7:20. But what I want to do for the rest of my little teaching moment tonight is I want to talk to you about something that please no one tell Suzanne Stabile I've talked about tonight. I want to talk to you about subtypes, and she would kill me if she thought I was talking about this in 20 minutes. But I just want to introduce you to this thought. Okay. You almost don't have to know a lot about, you almost can kind of leave your Enneagram stuff behind for a minute. Just start fresh with me. In sociology, psychology, all those social sciences disciplines, there is this wisdom that says there are 3 drives that we all have. There are 3 drives, or another word that is used in those disciplines is instincts that we all have. And that's the sexual instinct or drive, the social instinct or drive, and the self-preserving instinct or drive. Now this is going to stay, PG, don't worry. But that's not an Enneagram concept. That's just a social sciences concept. There are 3 drives that kind of motivate us, that lead us to act. The Enneagram comes in and says those 3 drives they call subtypes, and it just means that each one of us has a different kind of layered cake of which of those is biggest for us. Okay, so let's just think about, it means that for some of us, the sexual instinct, the sexual subtype in Enneagram language. And I'm going to give you kind of the Enneagram definitions in a moment for all 3 of those, sexual, social, self-preserving. But for some of us, the sexual instinct's the biggest layer of the cake. And for some of us, it's social. For some of us, it's self-preserving. And then one of the others is kind of the next layer of the cake. But then there's kind of a small layer of one that's a little bit kind of gets left out. Here's what's important about that, and here's why I'm talking about this tonight. It wasn't originally my plan to talk about this tonight, but I wanted to do it tonight because there's nothing that's more important in relationships than knowing which one of those 3 leads the dance for you. Which one of those 3 is the biggest layer in your kind of metaphorical cake? Go with me on all my crazy metaphors. And it's because the subtypes, sexual, social, and self-preserving, are about what you value most. And what you value most is what influences relationships problems and relationship opportunities more than your number. I use the Enneagram in premarital counseling, marital counseling, couples counseling a lot. And the problems that people have are never about their number differences. The problems that people have are about their value differences, which are represented in which of those subtypes leads the dance. So when people kind of ask in Enneagram and relationships, I'm a 5 and I'm married to a 9, is that going to be a problem? Well, Yes, just like if you were a 9 married to a 9, it's going to be a problem. That's one of the rules in life. Relationships are tough. But the biggest problems you're going to have are probably not going to be number differences. They're going to be more likely to be these value differences, which are represented in subtypes. Are you with me on that? That's why I want to talk about this. So the reason why this is we don't usually talk about all this in Enneagram 101 kind of sessions is because when you put the subtype layer on Enneagram wisdom, now instead of 9 types, you've kind of got 27 types. Because you've got people that are described as a sexual one, a social one, or a self-preserving one. You've got people who are a sexual 2, a social 2, or a self-preserving 2. Now this is, if you're brand new to this tool, I'm sensitive to, I know this can kind of feel like, oh my gosh, I'm swimming in an Enneagram soup of never-ending little weird minutia and stuff. So just let tonight kind of just tee this up for you. But usually Enneagram teachers say, don't get too worried about subtypes until you've done Enneagram work for a while. Do your core number work first. That's the most important stuff. But the reason why I'm talking about it tonight is because we're talking about, Clay asked me to talk about relationships. And I'm telling you, in Enneagram wisdom, subtypes have the most bearing on relationship problems and opportunities. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you about each of those subtypes. Because a goal that I would have is, if you're coming in brand new tonight and you don't know your Enneagram number, that's fine. I would like you to begin to see tonight what might be your dominant subtype between sexual, social, and self-preserving. Because if you can just have that language, that's going to help you start to recognize stuff that might be different about your relationship with the other people or person that you're in relationship with. If you can start to just talk about which of these 3 is the biggest, layer for you, which kind of gets left out. So let's talk about self-preserving first, the self-preserving subtype. The self-preserving subtype is preoccupied with getting and maintaining physical comfort. When self-preserving is the dominant subtype for a person, you're concerned about food and clothing and money and housing and physical health. These are the issues that get the main priority, and other issues get left out. So if you're a self-preserving dominant, if self-preserving is the biggest layer for you, you come into a room like this and you notice the temperature. You notice the seating. You notice your location in the room. You notice if you like being in this room. You notice if you're comfortable in this room. You notice whether the food was good tonight. You're aware of these things. You're aware of how you're feeling today. You're aware of kind of what your body's telling you. And there's good and bad. Nothing is bad. There's good and bad in it all. A beautiful thing about self-preserving being the biggest thing for people is you notice you're in touch with your body. You're in touch with your needs. You're in touch with what's going on. You're in touch with good boundaries usually. So people, when self-preserving is the biggest one, that's sometimes where those people, you're adjusting the lighting. You're kind of thinking about, what does the lighting need to be like? You're adjusting the mood. You're thinking about chair placement. In your home, you're adjusting furniture. You are worried about, how long I'm going to talk, when I'm going to end. Am I going to end on time? What do you need to get to next? Are you going to have enough time tonight to do whatever you need to do? Self-preserving is becoming a bigger layer of my cake. And that's one way of saying too, these subtype things change. They change. Whatever is the biggest one today may not be the biggest one next year or in another season. Often they change based on what we're going through. So if you're going through a hard moment or you're going through some trauma or you're going through some difficult times, a lot of people, self-preserving becomes real big. We'll talk about, when we talk about the other two, how some of the other two kind of become real big sometimes. But for me, one of the places where I recognize my self-preserving thing being big is I've got to have a buffer in my day between work and between whatever is coming after work. You know, if I've got if I've got dinner to go to, if I've got an event to go to, if I don't have a buffer that is by myself, that's whatever I want to do, that's kind of recharging in some way, I'm a bear to be around. You don't want to be around me. That's part of one of those pieces of sometimes the self-preserving subtype. Like, just recognize, I got to have a buffer. I got to have some space. I can't just go from thing to thing. And that's changed in me. I used to not be like that, but I'm in a season where self-preserving's gotten bigger. People who are hoarders are sometimes big self-preserving subtype people. So, you know, this is one of those, not everybody who is self-preserving is the biggest is a hoarder. You can kind of go, you know, there's different sides of the coin. I'm a thrower-awayer. Are any of you all thrower-awayers? I'm like, if you don't want me to throw it away, don't put it in my path, you know? So I'm kind of, it's just the opposite side of the coin, but I'm kind of like, that self-preserving thing for me is like, I'm always focused on my space in my office or in my home, and I'm always trying to like declutter and get rid of stuff and throw away and get rid of the mess. That's self-preserving stuff. But the other side of the coin for some self-preserving people is I got to make sure I have enough, and I'm hoarding and I'm accumulating, and now I've got too much. So it can look really different for different people, but you see how both of us, the hoarder and the thrower-awayer, both are really focused on, you know, my environment, what I have, what the space that I'm in is telling me, how I feel in it. When the self-preserving subtype is healthy, when it's functioning in a healthy way, these people are earthy and practical. And they're good at taking care of life's necessities and taking care of home and paying bills and getting your taxes filed on time and, you know, fixing the roof leak. I mean, that's a beautiful thing because self-preserving is really, the goal of all this is balance. Our punchline at the end of the night is balance. It's not, you know, if you're self-preserving, really you need to try to not be self-preserving. You need to try to be social. No, the goal is you need to use the self-preserving instinct at home and to take care of yourself. You need to use the social instinct at work and in community, and you need to use the sexual instinct in your one-on-one relationships. But we get out of balance, and when we bring a lot of self-preserving stuff to our one-on-one, close, intimate relationships, we're going to have trouble, right? And when we bring the social piece to home and we can never stop and we can never be alone and we can never turn off and we can never just attend to life's mundane necessities because our social instinct is too big, we don't get stuff done. So our goal is balance. Our goal is balance, is to be more balanced. When self-preserving, so I've been talking about what it looks like when self-preserving is the biggest layer. But when it's the thinnest layer, when it's the smallest, this is when people tend to forget the basic necessities of life and they don't come naturally. This is when people kind of forget to eat and forget to pay the light bill. And they may lack the drive to accumulate wealth or property or to care about those things. It's when time and resource management is neglected. And all of those things have serious negative effects, right? You know, you need to be putting money in your 401k. You need to be filing your taxes. You need to be paying your bills. If you don't fix that roof leak, it's going to be a big problem. So, you know, we don't want self-preserving to be so big that it takes over the dance and we don't bring anything else to the table, but we also don't want it to be so small. We've got to be in balance. But hopefully, if your self-preserving is the biggest layer, and all of us, one of them is biggest. It just is. None of us are perfectly balanced. It'll be a whole lifetime of us working on finding balance. But hopefully some of us are hearing, yes, self-preserving is the biggest layer, and this is what is going to cause opportunities and problems in relationships. The social subtype. Let's talk about social. The social subtype, when it's biggest, it's a powerful desire to be liked and approved of and feel safe with other people. You know, every two has some phase of their life where social's the biggest. They just do, because it's just kind of part of what it means to be a two. But the social subtype is when we start to recognize our place in community. It's important for us to be in community. It's important for us to have good reputations. It's really important for us to be known. It's important for us to have a good standing and to be a part of things. We want to be on the committee. We want to be in the church. We want to be in the group. We want to lead the group. That's when social's biggest, is when we have those instincts. When people have the biggest social subtype, they're preoccupied with being necessary and valued in the world. You know, they want to have place. They want to have stuff to do. They want to be valued. They want to be necessary. They like to feel involved. They like interacting with other people. When they enter a room, they're aware of the power structures. They're aware of group dynamics. They're aware of who's kind of got the center of influence and where do I need to go to be near the center of influence. When social subtype is biggest, those people pursue attention and success or fame or honor or leadership or appreciation. They like the security that comes from being a part of something bigger than themselves. And remember, I'm talking about average space, so just, don't get too righteous on me. We all do this. But when people have big social subtype, they like office politics a little, They like gossip a little. If you don't have anything nice to say, come sit by me, right? There's a little, And if it's news, it's not gossip, right? I just need to know how to pray. So, but that's part of kind of the social. It's like you kind of want to know what's going on. You kind of want to be in the know. You want to be a part of the whole social fabric and have your finger on the pulse. That's part of what it feels like when the social subtype is the biggest. They enjoy interacting with other people, but they avoid intimacy. When we get to the sexual subtype, we're going to talk about people that want intimacy and intensity. But the social subtype, you want to know what's going on. You want to have your pulse on the group. You want to be in the know. You want to be honored. You want to be recognized. You want to be necessary. You don't necessarily want to be intimate. And this sounds a lot like 3 behavior, right? But just recognize this stuff doesn't belong just to 3s. You can be a social 5. You can be a social 7. You can be a social 6. When the social subtype is the smallest layer, people have difficulty seeing the point of creating and sustaining social connections. And people can disregard the impact of the opinion on others. Community involvement may be little. They may feel like other people don't need them. They don't make a big difference. It doesn't really matter if they intervene. It doesn't really matter if they join. When the social subtype is the smallest, those people have frequent misunderstandings with even people who are supporters and friends and family members. It's like they just get kind of out of step sometimes when it's real small. Okay. Are you starting to kind of hear yourself in some of these a little bit? Just how in different phases of life, these things just kind of are big. And one of them leads the dance in every stage of life. And our goal is not to switch. If you're self-preserving, your goal is not to become social. Our goal is to bring balance and to recognize how all these subtypes create value differences. You can already see, we've just talked about the first two, but you can see how there's one group of people, self-preserving folks, who are valuing independence and autonomy and making sure they've got enough and kind of being comfortable. And we've got a whole nother group that's really about, let's be in the mix, let's be on the committee, let's be in the group, let's join. And can you see, if you've got a married couple and one of you is self-preserving dominant and one of you is social dominant, can you start to see how that's where your problems are going to be? One of you's ready to, party every Friday night. I'm kind of joking, but one of you's ready to join the church and to be in the group and to, let's be in a Sunday school class. And one of you's like, I can watch that at home. I listen to my podcast every day. I get all the info I need. They don't say anything better than that in Sunday school. So you can just start to see how these value differences can create problems in relationships. And we just can use this as again, de-escalating language and compassion points for each other. So the sexual subtype, everybody, first wants to be dominant in this, right? But let me say, the interesting thing about these subtypes is, and of course, sexual doesn't mean sexual. It means one-on-one, kind of one-on-one intensity. And we'll talk about that. But the funny thing about life and the Enneagram, and we just all kind of have found this to be true, is the thing that's biggest, the thing that it seems like we're best at, like if you're social dominant, the problems that you have in life are played out in that arena. If self-preserving is the dominant one for you, and it feels like you're good at that, you're good at being self-preserving, the problems that you have in life are played out in that arena. If the sexual subtype is your biggest subtype, it's like, I'm good at that. I'm a one-on-one kind of guy. I'm intense. I want us to have deep connection. The problems of life are kind of played out in that intimate arena. So we also have to know and be honest with ourselves about which of these subtypes is dominant for us, because that's going to help us know where are the problems going to be played out. So the sexual subtype. People, when it's biggest, we'll talk about that first, when the sexual subtype is biggest, there's a constant search for interaction and there's an attraction to really intense experiences. It's like anything that has a charge almost similar to a sexual charge. People who the sexual subtype is biggest for are sometimes described as a plug looking for a socket. It's like looking for something to be intense, looking for something to plug into, looking for someone to tune into, to plug into. And you're more interested in one-on-one stuff than you are in the group. So the difference between the social subtype and the sexual subtype is when the social is biggest for you, you walk into the room and you kind of recognize where the power structures are, what you got to do to be in charge, where your place needs to be. When the sexual subtype is biggest, you go find the most interesting person. And that may not be where the power is, that may not be where the influence is, but you just go find the most interesting person that you can go make a connection with. When the sexual subtype is the biggest, there's almost like a sense of being an intensity junkie. But intensity and intimacy are not the same thing. There is an exploratory approach to life. There is just this kind of desire for one-on-one stuff, this desire for an intense charge, this desire for the aesthetic. Sexual subtype people, whereas social subtype, self-preserving are worried about, the temperature and how comfortable the chairs are. When sexual subtype is the biggest, you're thinking about the aesthetic. You're thinking about how it feels, how it looks. You're drawing meaning from the aesthetic. But when the sexual subtype is the smallest, it's when matters of intimacy and stimulation are not natural. It's when they have trouble being interested in things that they're not interested in. You know, sexual subtype, when it's the biggest, you can find interest in anything. There's been seasons of my life where that's been the biggest for me. And one of the ways that it's played out for me is like, if you're interested in something, I'm interested in it. Earlier in life, you know, when we're all trying to figure out what color our parachute is and what we want to be when we grow up, it's like I had this kind of big sexual instinct. And I would have a conversation with somebody who was a marine biologist, and I'd be in law school and decide I needed to quit law school and go be a marine biologist. You know, because I could go with you on that. I could get interested in that. If you're passionate about it, I could be passionate about it. But when the sexual subtype is too thin, you have a great difficulty being interested in anything that you're not interested in. And that's a clue that you're out of balance and that it's too thin. So when you find yourself in a season of life where it's just hard for you to drum up engagement and interest in things that other people are engaged in and interested in, that's a clue that you're out of balance and the sexual subtype is too small. That layer is too thin. These change over time. I'm going to wrap up just a couple more minutes and I'll kind of pause and do Q&A and we'll wrap up. Just a little example about why this can be helpful and important in relationship. Very, very, very often, when a couple loses a child, you know, one of the worst traumas, right? When a couple loses a child, very often one of the members of the couple moves to a sexual dominant subtype and is ready for intensity and ready to talk about it and ready to process and ready to be in it and ready to connect. And if the other member of the couple doesn't move to become sexual dominant, it's hard for the couple to stay together. You can just kind of see how that would play out. And so these subtypes represent our values. They represent what matters the most to us. They're actually more important in relationships. They're not the most important thing in the Enneagram. In the Enneagram, you need to focus mostly on, you know, your own core number and how to be healthy and how to recognize when you're not healthy. But in relationships, these are the most important things because they represent our values. And so even if you don't know any other Enneagram stuff and you don't even know what your number is, if you and your spouse or you and the people who you're closest with can talk about and learn from each other, which of these is biggest in this season, recognizing it may shift, you'll start to have some language to deal with where your values are going to be really different. And you can just kind of process that and make some space, set a place at the table for each other and realize that the goal is balance. The goal is to be balanced and self-preserving when you need to kind of retreat and be at home. The goal is to bring the social dominant stuff to the work and community and church. And then to bring the sexual stuff to your one-on-one relationships. That's our goal, balance.